Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this SICC webinar, Building Resilience in Times of Crises. And of course, we've all discovered just how much resilience we have, even when we didn't even realize we had it, as we worked our way through 2020 and as we continue to cope with all the disruption that the pandemic means for our lives, our businesses, and our health. I'm delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Sunil Puri, a very dear friend whom I've known now for several years. First, when he was with the Human Capital Leadership Institute in Singapore, and latterly with the Center for Creative Leadership. And Sunil will be sharing with us today the key takeaways or messages and findings from a report that the Center for Creative Leadership did last year by interviewing 73 C-suite executives across Asia and just getting their thoughts about how they've managed their way through 2020 and what it means for how they're going to manage in the future. And not just manage, but also lead their teams and lead themselves. I also want to introduce my colleague Sharon Lim, who many of you know very, very well. Sharon heads the team that conceptualizes and executes all our events and activities. And Sharon is going to be your moderator this afternoon, managing the Q&A. So make sure you type in your questions in the Q&A function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar. You'll also note there's a chat function. Sunil will be using that to interact and engage with you throughout his presentation. So please try and remember to put your questions in the Q&A function. It'll make Sharon's life a lot easier. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Sunil. Welcome, Sunil, and over to you.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Sharon. It's a privilege to be here this afternoon with the SICC community. I was looking forward to this opportunity to share the latest research that we have done at the center with a group of senior business executives this afternoon. So let me share my screen. I just have a short deck. Okay, so you should see my screen now. So as Victor pointed, my name is Sunil and I head up research at the Center for Creative Leadership. For those of you who do not know about CCL, we are about a 70-year-old organization, and leadership development is all we do. We work with the largest organizations across the globe and also across Asia, helping them overcome their leadership challenges, if you will. My role in the organization is to look around the block, identify talent, leadership, HR trends, study those trends, publish those trends, and then go out and teach those trends back to the community, like in sessions that we are doing this afternoon. All of the research that we publish or my team publishes is in the public domain. All of that is there on the CCL website. So the study on crisis leadership, we started this study mid of last year when all of us, you, me, people we know, we were all kind of struggling with perhaps the biggest crises that had hit the world, certainly in the last 100 years, and certainly the biggest crises that we as leaders may have faced in our careers. So we spoke with 73 C-suite executives across 7 countries in Asia. These were CEOs, COOs, in some cases board directors in organizations, and we asked them what were they doing or what was their organizations doing to overcome the challenges that the crises had thrown at them, and also in personal capacity, how are they building their resilience? So we used COVID-19 as a backdrop, but the conversation was more about crisis leadership in general. So we partnered with the Institute of Corporate Directors in Philippines, Institute of Corporate Directors in Malaysia, Indonesia Economic Forum, Sassen Business School, and a few other organizations as we interviewed these executives across about 6 or 7 countries across Asia. So the one big takeaway that I have from this research and series of interviews that were carried out during the research period is that, this is a 3-set match that is being played between the world and COVID. And I'm drawing a parallel with a game of tennis or a game of badminton. And, COVID has beaten the world hollow in the first set. We've lost the first set miserably. The second set is at a deuce point. And again, drawing a reference with a game of badminton or tennis, this set could go either ways. Hopefully the world will win this set. We've come out with a vaccine. People are being inoculated across the globe, but the numbers still continue to surge in different parts, even in Asia. I hear Malaysia is in their second lockdown, and situation in UK and US is not looking great at this point. Even the numbers are surging in India and some of the other South Asian countries. So while we've come up with the vaccine, the COVID-19 virus refuses to give up. This is at a deuce point. Hopefully the world will win this set, and I'm sure the third set, the world will beat COVID hollow as our economies resurge, as our businesses pick up, as you and I get more busy, more productively trying to build the top line in our enterprises and organizations. So, let me start the sharing by asking you a question. As Victor pointed out that, this will be an interactive session. I do have a couple of reflective questions for you, and use the chat window to respond to those questions. So here is a question for you. These are a set of about 20 pictures in front of you on the screen, and hopefully you can see these pictures. I want you to think about 2020 and then select the picture or photo that talks to you about your feeling about the last year. So in the Center for Creative Leadership, we use these cards a lot, and we say that you do not choose the card, the picture card, the photo card chooses you. So let me give you about 30 seconds to do that. And again, plug in your responses in the chat window. Oops. Okay, so we have P, which is, it'll be nice to highlight why you are picking this picture as well. What does this picture talk to you? Maybe a sentence or maybe a couple of words. So I can see P, S, H, G, these photos have been picked up, but it'll be nice to get some commentary around why you picked this picture. Maybe a few words, that'll be nice. So interestingly, a few of you have picked up P on the bottom left of the slide. Too tired, too heavy. Hopefully the guy is recuperating, and hopefully he'll be back to picking up those heavy weights. T is a cliffhanger. Yes, we've been on a cliffhanger for a while now. Hopefully things will get better from here. I know G, Paul has picked G, head spinning. Yes, we've been on this crazy ride. Hopefully the ride is coming to an end. P again, Michael has picked P, exhausted, but stronger and fitter. Certainly, Michael, thank you. Christine has picked G, which is uncertain and an opportunity, excitement and worries. Wow, picture A, bonding with the family. This is the empathy part. Picture A talks about the empathy part of the crises. Bonding with the family, also bonding with your colleagues and your direct reports. Okay, so why I asked you this question is for us to jog our memory back to last year. Well, most of us wouldn't forget this year for the rest of our lives, but wanted you to be back in that emotion, because perhaps this is what the world has gone through. You see the picture on the left-hand side of a slide. This is a surfer trying to figure out the tsunami of a wave that stands tall in front of him or her. As our friend tries to figure out how to navigate this particular wave, which seems crazy, what is the speed, how destructive the wave could be, and so on, our friend doesn't have a choice. You know, he or she needs to be ready for whatever the ocean has to throw at him or her. And if our friend falls down and hopefully doesn't drown, the only option for him or her is to recenter, realign, and get ready for the next wave. We've been in this situation pretty much all throughout the last year. You know, things were changing on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, sometimes even in terms of number of days. You know, hey, the situation is worsening in the next 3 days. Lockdown is happening. We do not know how to navigate the situation, and so on. And we've lived through unprecedented times, but we had no choice. You know, we had to make do with whatever the COVID-19 was throwing at us, however the situation was unfolding in our countries, wherever we were. So we've seen some unprecedented people situations. You know, people were concerned about their health, their well-being, their financial situation, their jobs, the well-being of their family, their peers, and so on. We've been through crazy economic situation. You know, depending on which numbers you look at, the world GDP has contracted by between 1 and 3%. Different countries have been impacted very differently. For folks in Singapore, uh, the tourism and related industries have been hit real bad. Hopefully, the economic forum meeting in later this year will open up the doors to incremental tourism. But the situation has been really bad across ASEAN, across South Asia, across the West, and so on. Millions of people have lost their jobs, and so on. Also, business changes. Thanks to the adherence to technology and how people embrace technology, the business processes have evolved over the last 1 year. You know, contracts are being negotiated online, even contracts are being signed online. We are having these interactive forums online. You know, ideally, it would have been lovely to be in the same room and talk to all of you, but we are having these forums online. Also, business processes on how we negotiate, how we recruit people, how operations are being run, how board meetings are being done. All of these are being redefined at different organizations. And all of these changes lead to a level of uncertainty and constant stress. And I'm sure all of you, being senior business executives, have been through a fair amount of stress over the last 1 year. However, our research at the center tells us that in a crisis situation, the leader needs to bring his or her whole self forward to deal with the situation, mental and physical self. And to make that happen, leaders, especially during crisis times, need to be aware of the emotions that are going through their heads. Early on, these emotions could be, let's say, emotion of fear, anger, uncertainty, and I'm hoping in the last couple of weeks these emotions have moved on to emotion of hope, emotion of excitement, commitment, accountability, and so on. Leaders who are more aware of their emotions during crisis times, without letting these emotions rule them as they take critical decisions, are seen as more empathetic, are seen as more genuine, are seen as more honest. Now, if you think about the last 1 year or in any crisis situation, so let's use COVID-19 as a backdrop, but talk about crises in general. If you think about any crisis situation, a leader or anybody who's at a role of responsibility in the organization typically undergoes a fair amount of external pressure and internal pressure. And these external pressures as a business leader could come from anywhere. These could come from your employees who are concerned about their health, their well-being. You are concerned about their health, their well-being. Or these pressures could come from vendors and suppliers who are not able to fulfill their commitments perhaps during a crisis period. Or it could be customers. Customers, they may not have been served appropriately due to the crises, and therefore they may be unhappy. Or these pressures may come from boards if you are a CEO in the organization, because boards sometimes have unrealistic expectations from their C-suite or their senior most executives. These pressures could also come from, let's say, the regulator or the compliance agency. The regulators want to be in tighter control during a crisis period. Or these pressures could come from society. if the product that you deal in or the service that you deal in is perceived to not kind of impact the climate or the social fabric appropriately or positively, these pressures could come from the society as well. So there are tremendous external pressures that we need to deal with as leaders during a crisis period. And then there are also internal pressures. I'm sure being business leaders, you've asked at least once or more over the last 1 year, hey, am I good enough to deal with all of this? Am I equipped enough to take my organization through this crazy tunnel and I can just see a sliver of light on the other side of the tunnel? Do I have the right talent in me and in my team to make sure that our organization thrives, not only survives in a typical crisis period? Now, leaders who do not enjoy complete confidence of their boards or their executive teams or their bosses tend to feel a lot more internal pressures than leaders who do enjoy the confidence of their seniors or their executive teams or their boards and so on. In terms of responses, there are two lines of responses that we picked up in the interviews. One is that, hey, this is a crisis period. Let's keep our head above the water, somehow survive during crises, and then we can come back and pick up the threads and start running again. Let's say in 2021, at some point, organizations will start running again, hopefully. The second line of response that we picked up was, hey, this is crisis period. I have my back against the wall and so does my competitor. So let me use this time to go even more aggressive and gain market share. I picked that up in a lot of conversations with the CEOs during the research that we were doing for this particular paper. So two lines of responses, but nonetheless, the leaders are responsible in a crisis period at an organization level. So they need to demonstrate organizational leadership, and also they need to demonstrate personal leadership, resilient leadership, individual leadership. And they both need to happen. While organization leadership gets reported, then people talk about it and it gets written in media. At this point, nobody is talking about personal leadership. Nobody is talking about, for instance, the mental and physical health issues that leaders are facing or may face because of what they've been through in the past about a year or so. So leaders need to demonstrate, leadership at both levels. Let me quickly ask you to reflect upon the biggest learning you have had about 2020. So again, we've been through a lot of anxiety, in some cases, a lot of pain. But what is the biggest learning if you were to highlight from the last 1 year? Share that again in the chat window. That'll be nice, and I'll be happy to read out the responses, if you will. So let me give you about 30 seconds. Victor says we are more adaptable than we think we are. Certainly we are, irrespective of what business we are in, what we've been doing, we've been pushed to show our adaptable self, our resilient self. Chuka says, talks about adaptability. Sharon talks about change. We are capable of change, again, being resilient and adaptable. Shirley talks about gaining trust from your bosses and trust your colleagues, even though everybody is out of sight. And we'll spend some time talking about that. Trust is the currency of confidence during a crisis period. Shirley, thanks for highlighting that. Patsy says agility and opportunity. Christine highlights self-leadership. So hopefully, we are all better in terms of conducting ourselves as leaders, thanks to the last 1 year. So I would encourage you to reflect upon the learnings at an individual level and also at a team level, because there can be a million negative things said about the world, about the COVID-19 situation and the crises and what it caused to the world and the people therein. But there are great learnings as well. Organizations are more resilient, organizations are more agile, organizations and leaders have shown that they are extremely adaptable. A lot of enterprises have pivoted right around to see opportunities that they never saw before crises. So I would encourage you to highlight these learnings in a team setting if you haven't already. Now, based on the conversations that we had based on the conversations we had, here is the crises model that we created. Uh, and as you can see, it is a 3-stage, 7-step model. So at the center of the crises model, you see the 3 stages that a lot of leaders, a lot of organizations, a lot of teams went through. The first stage is about reflecting. So as business leaders, we all know that we hate uncertainty. We want to project next 3 months, our revenues and our costs over the next 3 months. We want to project next 6 months, next 1 year, maybe next 2 years. A few years ago, when I was still actively consulting, I worked on a project where an organization wanted to project for the next 7 years. Imagine, next 7 years. I hope it doesn't happen anymore in the consulting world. And I'm sure the report that I created for that organization is no more than a pile of paper now. But that's the kind of certainty we want as senior business executives. And when a crisis hits us, and there is a lot of uncertainty that a crisis brings along with it, we get flustered as senior executives. We start shooting in all directions. We start shooting in the dark. Sometimes it is because of the peer pressure. It is because of pressure from boards or our bosses. Hey, Mr. CEO, the organization is in a crazy situation, and what are you doing about it? Show us results, and so on. And therefore, we feel this compulsion to react or act in a crisis period. Our research tells us that leaders who understand that it's better to slow down before they start sprinting in this sprint-a-thon of a crisis, they are better positioned. So leaders who are able to reflect through orienting themselves and making sense of the situation as it is playing out in their business and in their industry and in their country may be better positioned to deal with any crisis. So orienting is about understanding the difference between perhaps reality and rumor. Sense making is about understanding how the crisis is impacting different organizational departments or businesses or geographies. So I remember when COVID-19 hit most of the organizations in the first quarter, towards the end of the first quarter of last year, and we wrote another paper at that point. A lot of organizations created crisis teams. And these teams were sitting in different functions, different departments, different geographies, and their job was to understand how the crisis is impacting the organization and different parts of the organization and reporting it back to the headquarters. So sense making is about creating that platform to collect information and data. And sense making needn't be through formal networks. It can also happen through informal networks. For instance, I interviewed a banking leader in Philippines, and he shared that when the lockdown happened, the banks were at the front lines in all countries, but there was very little clarity around operational aspects of banking and the intersections of banking with different industries and the central bank in particular. So this particular leader used his personal network to create a WhatsApp group of CEOs in financial services industries and banks across the country. So he had about 17 or 18 CEOs whom he knew professionally, and he created an informal WhatsApp chat group to compare notes on how they were dealing with the situation as it was unfolding in Philippines on a day-to-day basis. So, sense making is also at an informal level. And in real sense, orientation and sense making is essentially trying to understand the length and breadth of the crisis, trying to figure out the dimensions of the crisis, how big it could be, how it is impacting the organization, and so on. And once the leader has reflected, he needs to respond, not react to the situation. At an organization level, the executive is expected to, first of all, triage the various challenges that may be sitting on his desk due to the crisis. So when a crisis happens, typically a lot of fires start burning, and a leader needs to figure out which fire to douse first. The term triage comes from hospital administration. So when typically a lot of patients walk into the emergency room, the duty doctor needs to take a call on which patient must see the doctor now, and which patients or group of patients can wait for a while with maybe general medicine. So that's the triaging process. It's not important how we prioritize. It's important we have a prioritization or triaging criteria and a triaging team in place. And the organization or people know how we are selecting which challenges to go after. For instance, and again, taking the example of COVID-19, a lot of organizations highlighted that cash flow is the king during COVID-19. So, when they were triaging issues to solve for, anything that impacted cash flow negatively had to be taken up first. Or anything related to people had to be taken up first. Or if you're a project management company, maybe it was labor situation during a crisis period. Or it could be serving key clients or customers during crisis period. So it's not important how you triage or prioritize. It's critical that in any kind of crisis, when there are different fires burning, we have a triaging criteria or prioritization criteria. Once we have a criteria, we strategize. And you're all kind of senior business executives. Don't want to spend a lot of time on strategy, because I know, that's what we all do, and as senior leaders. But during a crisis period, the strategy needs to be twin focused: long term, mid term, and also very short term. When I interviewed a bunch of board directors for this research, they highlighted that several boards were meeting every week during March, April, May, June period, the early part of the crisis. And they expected the CEO to not only share with the board what he or she was doing over the next quarter, over the next month, over the next 6 months, what the plan is for the next quarter, but also between this meeting this week and the next meeting next Wednesday, maybe, or next Thursday in this case. So the strategy needs to be at multiple levels, and also sometimes hard decisions need to be taken. And you all know that as business executives, having lived through the biggest crises perhaps in our careers, you need to take hard decisions. When I interviewed a senior business leader, a very well-respected CEO in this case, he drew a metaphor with a ship that is sailing in rough waters. So he said, Sunil, the ship is in rough waters. People are at risk. So some people need to be off-boarded. Actually, he said, thrown off, thrown out of the ship, for the ship and the people therein to survive. At that point, when I was interviewing the leader, I was like, hey, this is a mean thing to say. But honestly, sometimes hard decisions need to be taken. Headcount reduction, salary reduction, sending people on furloughs, reorienting the business, and so on. And strategy is a central element around taking these hard stands or hard decisions. Once you've strategized, we execute. And again, execution is all about communication. In this case, execution needs to be more humane, and execution is also about differentiating when, what, and how to lead, and when, what, and how to manage. So there is crisis leadership, and then there's crisis management. Well, you manage processes, you manage operations, you manage strategy, and you lead people, you motivate people. A lot of organizations and leaders, especially during crisis period, tend to mix up the two. So you start managing strategy, you start managing operations. Well, yes, you need to manage that too. And you start sorry, I mixed up. You start managing people and you start leading strategy, you start leading operations. Well, you need to manage people, but it's critical that we motivate people during a crisis period. So leaders who have incremental clarity around what to manage, how to manage, and what to lead, how to lead, are better positioned during a crisis period. So once you've responded, which is the second stage, the third stage is about reframing. Number one, making the most of what the crisis has thrown at the organization. So recalibrating, for instance. Recalibration is about evaluating the environment closely and tweaking your process, tweaking how you conduct, tweaking your business model, and so on. So for instance, the fact that we are doing this meeting online is a recalibration. The fact that, I don't go to saloons now, as you can see from my look, is a recalibration. So I get, somebody in to, for a haircut and so on. It's also recalibration that product and project launches are happening online. So I was doing the same presentation to one of the FMCG companies last week, and they shared that they had a very successful product launch online, which they had never thought of that could happen. That they could do a product launch of in an FMCG company online. So and they had a very successful product launch, and they said perhaps we'll never go back to a physical product launch, or we'll be very selective in doing physical product launches because of the success we've seen of an online product launch. also home offices and so on. Once you recalibrate, you tend to pivot. You understand what are the opportunities and how do I tweak my business model and my business processes to benefit from those opportunities. For instance, a lot of engineering companies went into producing, let's say, ventilators during the initial period of COVID. A lot of companies that were into clothing started manufacturing masks when there was a shortage of masks. An organization that we work closely with, uh, this company was into shared office space, and during a pandemic time, nobody wants to go in a shared office space and work in a shared office space. So they started renting out their office furniture for setting up home offices, an office like this, or an office that you are working off from your home. And so, organizations pivoted to make the most of what the crisis was throwing at them. Also, reframing is about getting ready for the next crisis. Reframing is about absorbing what I as an individual, what we as a team, what us as an organization have picked up from this crisis, so that we are smarter for the next crisis. And I can promise you the next crisis is right around the corner, and it will happen much sooner than you and I think it will. So this is the organization leadership model that I've talked about. However, the big aha for us as when we were doing this research was what sits in the middle, the personal leadership model, the middle band in the graphic in front of you. And I want to spend some more time on that band. So I'll take up those 7 elements in the subsequent slides. So the first one is about learning from your experiences, reflecting on your experiences. Now, for this research, I interviewed a leader who had a bank branch in the World Trade Tower when the unfortunate incident happened in 2001. And this particular leader did not lose any employee, but again, he was stuck with a situation to reopen that branch from his bedroom on his personal phone and some hired printers and some office equipment over the next 2 to 3 days. I interviewed a leader in Sri Lanka. Again, a similar situation. He used to work out of the central bank, and there was a bombing at the central bank, and he was expected to restart the desk and operations over the next 2 or 3 days in a hired space. I interviewed a leader who was leading manufacturing in an FMCG company, and he shared with me that he was stuck in an earthquake in Kobe when that happened, and the manufacturing line moved by about a feet. So those of you who have an engineering background, you may understand and appreciate that if your manufacturing line moves by this much, it's a hell of a task. And he was tasked to restart the operations in 1 week. Another leader in Philippines who shared a story that some people in his leadership team were kidnapped. So they went for a project site evaluation, and they got kidnapped by a local terrorist group. A crazy situation to be in, a kind of situation you can never prepare for. So luckily, they could get them released. But again, reflecting on your experiences is critical during a crisis period. How same is the current crisis from the earlier experiences that the leaders may have had? How different it is from the earlier experiences that the leaders may have had? Also, it gives you confidence that, hey, I can dig my heels really deep because I've dealt with crises in the past. It's critical how we look at our performance in the earlier crises or our experiences in the earlier crises when we are dealing with the current one. For those of you who are familiar with the attribution theory, there are multiple ways how you can attribute your success or failure to a situation. One, it could be around personality. Hey, my personality is such that I love crunch situations, and therefore I was able to deal with the last crisis. Or my personality is such that I can't deal with uncertainty, and therefore I'm really bad at dealing with crises. Or you could attribute it to chance. So I was lucky that the crisis did not hit my department, or I was really unlucky that I was stuck in the middle and center of the crisis. Or the third element is difficulty level. Hey, the crisis wasn't a big crisis for me, and therefore, the difficulty level wasn't very high. I could deal with the crisis easily. Or the fourth one is around discretionary effort. So I could deal with the last crisis or last crucible situation because I took some actions to make sure that collaboration was happening. People were motivated, silos were broken, and people were able to work offline and so on and so forth. So if you think about these four options on how you attribute your success or failure to a situation, personality, chance, and difficulty level are beyond us. So, we can't do much about it. But discretionary effort is something that we control. So we realized in our conversations that leaders who attributed their success or failure to discretionary effort were better positioned to deal with crises in a positive manner. And these reflection from the experiences is not only about professional experiences. I interviewed a CEO, for instance, uh, now a young CEO in a solar generation company, and he shared that he was talking about his experience as a graduate student in the US when he went to do his went to study and obtain his PhD a few years ago. And he was like, hey, I flunked my first few credits. I was struggling because English was not my first language, but I had to really pick myself up and really push hard on my resilient self to get my PhD within the 5 or 6 year period. And he said once when this crisis happened, I immediately thought of how I had survived the quote unquote academic crisis that he faced a few years ago. And he got strength from that. So these are not only professional situations that we need to get strength from or experiences, these are also personal experiences. And sometimes these are collective experiences. So, some of the thinkers attribute why Hong Kong, Singapore, and maybe Taiwan was relatively kind of better off than most other countries during this crisis is because they experienced SARS in 2003, 2004, or thereabout. Why some of the countries like Philippines or South Asia, or most countries in South Asia, were better positioned and were able to deal with the crisis despite dismal economic situation was because there's a lot of uncertainty in these countries. So think about Philippines, a lot of tornadoes, a lot of cyclones, floods, political unrest, and so on. Think about South Asia, similar situation. So, these are collective experiences that the nation has been through to build incremental resilience in people. But it's critical how we look at the experiences in the first place. The second bucket, as we reflect, is about understanding your values. So I interviewed this executive CEO of Asia Pacific. I'm just looking at time. So this is a CEO, APAC CEO in a big four consulting company. And I was interviewing him for this research, and he shared how his organization had to let a lot of people go. And during the conversation, he shared that, hey, Sunil, by the way, I also put in my papers last week. And I just assumed that, hey, he may have been asked to go. He's just not sharing that with me. But maybe he read my mind and he said, before you assume that I was asked to go, I must tell you that I put in my papers. I was not asked to leave. So deeper probing, on deeper probing, he told me that, hey, I couldn't handle how my organization was dealing with exits and headcount reduction. So he shared that, again, this is a leader in a very well-respected US headquartered consulting firm. And he said that, he had to let a lot of people from his team go, and he was given a script to read with a lawyer dialing in so that he doesn't mess up and there's no, there is kind of no legal situation that arises out of letting people go. And he could not deviate from the script. He said, Sunil, these were people who had served the organization, had worked with me for 5, 10, 15 years. And when they needed emotional support, I couldn't even do that on the call because I had a lawyer dialing in from the headquarters. He couldn't deal with it. So, this is an extreme situation, but there are value gaps that we all have between our own personal values and beliefs and the values and beliefs of the organization or the leadership team or the headquarter, if the headquarters is based in another country. And these could be because of the fabric of the organization or the context, cultural context in which the organization operates at the headquarters. So, if you're a US based company, I'm guessing, and I'm generalizing here, the concept of pink slip is not very alien. However, if you are taking the same approach to letting people go in Asia, people here have a much deeper connect with the enterprise or the organization or the employer. Just replicating that process here may not work. Typically, during a crisis period, these value gaps or chasms between personal values and collective values of the organizations become wider. And sometimes they are so wide, like in the situation I just narrated a few minutes ago, that leaders are not able to deal with it. However, we leaders are better off trying to plug these values gap, unless it is so huge that it is impossible to sort of jump the value gap that has happened between the leader's personal value and the organizational values. So, leaders, some of the ways you could do that is trying to understand your own biases. Maybe this values gap comes from a bias that you may have as a leader. You may be able to resolve it by reflecting. You may be able to resolve it by having conversations. Again, a leader in Philippines who works for a family-owned enterprise now. His last job was with a very well-respected multinational organization in the banking space. Now he comes from a professional MNC bank, and he had a very strong sense of meritocracy as he got into this organization. Now, when the crisis happened, he was asked to let some people go, and he was asked to prioritize loyalty over meritocracy. And he said, Sunil, I was very uncomfortable because all my life, meritocracy was the number one priority when you were taking hard decisions. And now I was being asked to look at loyalty. So unlike my earlier friend that I interviewed, he said that I tried to probe a little deeper. So he had conversations with the board, conversations with the promoter family, a few key other shareholders. And he was narrated several stories of how people who had been loyal to the organization had helped this particular organization grow in the past. So in his own mind, he aligned and reconciled that, hey, loyalty buys you perhaps a second chance. And he said, Sunil, if we undergo another round of headcount reduction, then I'm not looking at loyalty. But in the first round of headcount reduction, loyalty does buy you a second chance. So that was his way of reconciling the values gap that was happening. When you are responding to the situation, you need to connect authentically with people. At the center, we define authenticity as alignment between personal or individual or internal's values and beliefs and the external behavior that we demonstrate. Excuse me. So that is the alignment that happens. We need to connect with humility and empathy, and that always helps in terms of connecting authentically. If you're authentic, you are seen as more honest, you are seen as more empathetic, you are seen as more genuine. Now, a leader I interviewed in Singapore, a senior director in one of the largest membership-based organizations, and they do have a lot of grocery and retail stores. Well, you can guess the name, but I wouldn't divulge. So this particular leader highlighted that he was responsible for running their grocery and retail outlets. And he said that I was sending out emails around, hey, how I and the leadership team stands by the people at the front lines, people at the cash registers in their retail stores. But he said that, he realized that maybe people were not able to make the connect, that all the people and he himself and the leadership team were in the same boat. So he decided to spend a few days at all of the individual retail stores, standing at the cash registers with the people during the COVID situation, just to show people that he's just not sending out emails. He is equally vulnerable. He feels equally vulnerable and connected and empathetic with the frontline folks who are at the front lines. And that not only helped him build a connect with the front lines, that not only helped him demonstrate the level of empathy that he and the senior leadership team had from the front lines. Also, because he was doing the cash registers for the first time, he made a few mistakes, and that showed the vulnerability aspect of the leader as well. And in his own words, that gave people license to make mistakes and learn from those. So a great example of connecting authentically with the teams. Now, authenticity is not about going to your board and telling them that, hey, there is a situation and I don't know how to deal with it. And, I can't read the situation. That's being authentic, but maybe quote unquote foolishly authentic. Authenticity is going to your board and saying, this is what I know, here is what I am doing. And if the situation changes, then we will tweak accordingly. I don't have a strategy for how we will tweak, but we will tweak accordingly. Also, authenticity is also about being transparent with your teams. One of the leaders narrated, how he had this is a leader in Malaysia and a family-owned enterprise. And I was talking to somebody in the family, and he shared that their organization, like most organizations, went through a lot of pain, and they had to let a lot of people go. But before, going out and telling people, hey, I'm sorry, you have no job, he said that he started sharing the financial data for the enterprise on a month by month basis with everybody in the organization. Right from the janitor to the senior most leader, everybody knew the financial data and what the organization was doing, how the numbers were showing, how the cash flows were showing, and so on and so forth. And then he said that, hopefully people saw that the situation wasn't good. And when he went out and rolled out those hard steps that he had to roll out in the organization, there was less pushback because he was being transparent and authentic with the enterprise and all the employees therein. So being authentic is the first step, and being authentic is critical because that helps you build trust. And trust, as I said earlier, as one of you pointed out, is the currency of confidence during a crisis period. Well, you can't build trust during crises, but you can encash upon your trust capital that hopefully you and the senior leaders may have built during peacetime before crises. And typically demonstrating loyalty, typically demonstrating integrity, capability, fulfilling the promises that you've made, builds this trust capital over a time period. And once you have a large pot of trust capital, you can draw upon that trust capital to take hard decisions. For instance, if my boss was to come to me and say, hey, Sunil, you don't have a job. And if I trust my boss, I would assume that my boss has literally boiled the ocean, evaluated all the options before having this conversation with me that I have no job. And yes, I'll be bitter. Yes, I'll be unhappy. But perhaps a delta X less unhappy or less bitter if I trust my boss versus if I had no trust on my boss and I would be like, hey, he or she just wants to fire me and he or she is taking this opportunity to do that. So that's what your trust capital helps you do. It helps you set newer direction during a crisis period, get alignment with different departments, and buy commitment from people. Now, the last step in the respond phase is recharging your energy. So just like a phone that you see here, and I'm charging this phone, all of us need to recharge our energy once in a while, especially during a long and an elongated, critical crisis like the one that we've been through. We all need to get our mojo back once in a while. For instance, I'm now based in India. I used to live in Singapore earlier, but now based in India. And my team is in Singapore. My boss is in the US, and I'm quite used to working online on camera because that's how I've been operating for the past 2 or 3 years since I moved back to India. Now, when the crisis hit and there was a lockdown in India, I was very comfortable. I was like, hey, this is how I've been operating and there shouldn't be a problem. But during June, July period, I remember, feeling unhappy. I was not as articulate as I usually am. My team started, telling me subtly that, hey, Sunil, we're not hearing much from you. My boss said that quite blatantly, Sunil, that, there's something going, you're not sharing a lot and you're not talking in team meetings and so on. And I realized that, I was going through that period where my energy or my mojo or my resilience was running dry. My energy pools were running dry. And I just took a couple of days back. I cut myself off from all the negative news that I was chasing at that point or reading at that point around number of deaths, number of cases, how far away the vaccine is, and so on. I cut myself from all negative media. And, a 1 week break, it brought me back into action. And thank God I was back to my usual self. I'm sure you all went through this particular cycle as well, unless you took you took respite in building your resilience through, let's say, physical resilience methods like sport, like running, like playing, and so on. A lot of my friends started running during the lockdown period because that was the only activity you could step out of the house for. Or it could also be about mental resilience. And you see the graphic at the bottom of the slide. And mental resilience is about mindfulness, it's about meditation, it is about journaling. And then emotional resilience is about emotional savoring. Emotional savoring is hanging on to positive news for delta X longer, because we are all tuned to leaning towards negative news. Uh, Hanging on to a positive comment by your boss, a positive comment by your client, or maybe something that has happened at home which brings you joy for a few seconds or a few minutes longer is what we call emotional savoring. That really helps get your emotional resilience back. Or practicing gratitude. And then social resilience through building social connections. Now, it's critical that we do that as senior executives. As I said earlier, nobody is talking about mental health at this point, or nobody is talking blatantly about mental health at this point. We are just shoving it under the carpet. But that is something that is going to really come out in the open, come out in the fore over the next couple of months. And we as leaders, we owe it to our teams, we owe it to ourselves and our families and our peers to make sure that we are resilient, we are in the best of our mental and physical health. Finally, reframing is about shifting mindsets. The 7 mindsets we picked up in this research are here on the slide. Um, Cultivating an owner's mindset, is about making sure that we bounce back hard in 2021 and not be happy with 1 or 2% growth rate that we may have seen in the last 1 year. Or I want to point you to number 5 on the middle right of the slide, which is about everyone has a voice, but not everyone has a vote. Now, during crisis period or during peacetime, during business as usual, we want to get buy-in from all our peers, all our team members, all our colleagues before taking a hard decision. In a crisis period, a leader doesn't enjoy that privilege of taking time and taking decisions that are very well thought out. We need to take decisions, and we need to take them fast. We need to take them as of yesterday, and our neck is on the line. So, yes, everyone has a voice. We hear as many people as we can, but not everyone has a vote in a crisis period. And then number 7 is about the fact that long term is dead. Think about short term and very short term during a crisis period. Don't go it alone. Think about partnerships, think about ecosystem, and so on. And finally, what are the skills that we must have as we try and get prepared for the next crisis? There are 4 clusters of skills we picked up basis the 73 conversations we had with CEOs and board leaders. Number 1 is around trust. So being trustworthy and trusting others. Self-awareness, understanding your values, understanding your beliefs, understanding your strengths, your development needs, growth mindset, willingness to learn new things, irrespective of the level that you are at or your age, and adversity handling capability, which is a sum total of being flexible, keeping calm, being adaptable, agile, resilient, and so on. Now, as I end this sharing, and hopefully we'll have a dialogue, would love to get some feedback and reactions and also your comments. I want you to reflect on the question that I have in front of you. And in the interest of time, I would want you to sort of think about this question for a couple of seconds. Maybe no need to type into the chat box, but think about it and make a note somewhere. And the only thing I would urge is share this commitment with a colleague, or with a friend, or with someone, or one of your peer group members, and make them accountable to ask you once in a while how you are doing on your commitment. And maybe you could do the same for your colleague or your peer or someone at home. We call them commitment partners in CCL parlance, and commitment partners really help you make accountable or be accountable for the commitment you've made. So I would urge you to do that as you think about the next 11 months in 2021. Now, finally, before I close, at the center, we are working with a few large organizations across Asia, helping them getting their leaders more resilient. Through the model on the left-hand side that I showed, we have an online leadership resilience program that we call Burn Bright. And we are also working with a few very large organizations across Asia, across Singapore and Philippines, on preparing them on crisis leadership. So we are working with the senior most executives and their direct reports, making sure that we are taking the lessons away from this crisis and get smarter for the next one. Now, to close, I would say three things. One, this is a long journey that we've been through. This is not the last crisis. We will see more crises much sooner than what we think, and therefore focus on your own resilience and the resilience of your teams. Number two, shake off the inertia that you or your teams may be in coming out of 2020, because a lot of organizations were growing at 1 or 2% or not growing at all. In 2021, in 2020, that was good. In 2021, that isn't. So when I speak with a lot of CEOs, they are worried about the carry forward inertia in their teams. So we need to shake off that inertia in ourselves, in our teams, in our direct reports, our organization, our business units, and so on. And number three, build your crisis leadership muscle to get smarter for the next crisis. In the paper, we refer to crisis leadership muscle as a sum total of crucible experiences, so that you are getting prepared to be being comfortable with discomfort. Also, the right set of mindsets and the right set of capabilities that I talked about to build your crisis leadership muscle. So let me pause here and hopefully get some responses, some questions back. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Sunil, for the very wonderful presentation, and also I enjoyed very much some of the real life examples that you provided. So we'll now move on to the Q&A segment of today's webinar. I'd like to invite all the participants to key in their questions in the Q&A function of the platform. But I guess as the moderator, I would kick off with a question for you, Sunil. So earlier on, you mentioned about how leaders need to lead and manage both at the organizational level and also at the personal level. But how can leaders self-manage? How can they balance, dealing with personal issues with dealing with company matters? Any advice?
So Sharon, one of the critical capabilities that I also highlighted is about self-awareness. And you may be surprised basis the data that we have at the center, even at the senior leadership level. And I'm talking about C-suite and even CEOs in large organizations. We see that, there is a big gap in terms of where they are on self-awareness and where they could be. I would say the route to personal leadership is through self-awareness. You can't bypass the skill of self-awareness to get down to being more accountable personally and being a better leader at a personal level. So if there was one thing you could do to be a more effective leader personally or at an individual level, have a higher level of self-awareness. And there are tools to do that. There are tools, there are feedback tools, there are a lot of tools that we prescribe to organizations and leaders. You could work with a coach to do that. But if that is one area that you feel that you lack in, or you may want, or you may not even know, and if open conversations with some of your colleagues point to the fact that, hey, there is room to do better on self-awareness, I would say do that, because that is the only route to becoming a good leader at a personal level.
Right. Thank you so much. And then there was also mention of trust and how trust is a very important element, given that most of us are still working remotely. Any insights from your research to tell us perhaps what practical skills or tips leaders can employ to better manage their teams when they are working from home?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is, and I've noticed that in my interactions with my boss and also with some of the clients, when you're working online, a lot of feedback we give is developmental feedback. So, when we are in a physical space together, we would typically go to a colleague or a direct report and say, hey, by the way, you did a great job on XYZ, or on the last call, you did a great job. On our last meeting, I thought that point you made was brilliant. We tend to do a lot less of that when we are working remotely. Right. And, most of the feedback we give our direct reports or our teams or our peers is developmental. Hey, you messed up on that, or you did not do that properly, or you could have done better on X, Y, Z. So I would say that, that is something that we need to do as we work with our colleagues and our teams online. And I would say that, working online, while it's hard to read the body language, the complete body language working online on Zoom, it's a great opportunity to connect deeply with your employees. For instance, at this point, I've invited the SICC community to my study at my home. And I have a 10-year-old who may run into the room. I asked him not to run into the room because I have a call, but you may get an opportunity to meet him. You may get an opportunity to meet my dog and so on. In fact, during the last 1 year, I know a lot more about my colleagues and my direct reports, personal, space, if you will. I've met their kids. I've met their grandparents in one case. I certainly have met their spouses, their pets, and so on. So it's a huge opportunity to form a deeper connect when you're working online. And then there are tricks that I've seen being played out, an online coffee hour where we all get a cup of coffee, or also I was a part of this sharing, and I was doing a session for a senior leadership team, and before the session I got a big box of cocktails, and they sent that box to everybody. It was an evening session, and online before the session we spent 15 minutes making cocktails. So there are ways and means to engage when you're working online, but you need to be creative around those. And in terms of building trust, I would say, Sharon, the classical or the traditional 3 elements of loyalty, integrity, and capability still hold true and still stands really, really strong. So if you do that over time consistently, you will build trust capital. It's hard to build trust capital during crisis time. So if you're in your new job and your team doesn't trust you, good luck to you. You'll have a hard time. But hopefully most of us are not in our new jobs or most of us haven't made a job change in the last 1 year. Hopefully most of us have built that capital before the crisis hit.
Thank you, Sunil. We will now move to the questions that have come in the Q&A function. There is a very good question from Juka. Reframing and pivoting and being a different kind of leader is hard. If one is hard-nosed, numbers-driven leader, can you become an emotional leader? Is there evidence that people have managed to do this well, better than expected, or do you think we have seen more leadership failures than before?
Great question, Juka.
Yes.
And I wish I had a simple answer that, hey, 88% of leaders have done this or 26% of leaders haven't done this. What I can tell you, Juka, and you may have, being a senior executive, you may have seen it yourself, is that even hard-nosed leaders, even those who are numbers driven, have become a little more empathetic. Because at the end of the day, all of us are in the same boat. In the current crisis that we are facing, we are all in the same boat. Maybe we are a few seats ahead of one another or a few seats behind one another, but we are in the same boat. A lot of people, and when I was interviewing, a lot of interviewees confessed that before the crisis, they found it hard to see the people aspect when they were dealing with business problems. But because of the crises, when they realized that, everybody is equal for COVID-19, nobody gets any favor over another. When a virus hits a country or when a virus hits a particular geography, they realized and they became Delta X more empathetic. So I would say there is anecdotal evidence that even hard-nosed, numbers-driven people became more empathetic, but I wish I had numbers to attach to that. Hopefully, somebody is working on that research and we will have numbers on that. But if not emotional, at least they've become empathetic. And one of the leaders narrated a situation, when one of his direct reports, his spouse passed away because of the virus situation. And he said, it impacted me so much that I can never be the leader I was before the crisis. So, people have been through tough experiences which have made them certainly more empathetic. I can tell you basis anecdotal anecdotal evidence, but no hard numbers there.
Thanks very much. If your other research reveal any insights or figures, do keep us posted. We'll be happy to share it with our members. Now, another very interesting question from Jack, and this is talking about fresh grads and those in junior executive positions. And he's saying that suddenly quite a number of them are willing to change jobs and to pivot to something that they view as being more profitable since COVID-19 hit us. However, because of a lack of experience, it's also preventing them from making that change. So any word of advice for these leaders of tomorrow, to hang on or to reskill, which means going back to school, to be prepared for the new norm?
Yeah, Sharon, this is an interesting question. And Jack, thank you for that. I would say if I was given an option to hang on or reskill, I would certainly lean towards reskill,
Okay.
And I wouldn't equate necessarily reskilling to going back to school. Reskilling is also about experiences that you are going through. Reskilling is also about lessons of experiences. It is about working in a particular line for a couple of weeks or a couple of months and building that skill, working under an expert or shadowing an expert and getting that skill under your belt. So, if you think about, if you've read about future of work and future of workplaces and how the jobs may be redefined over the next decade or two, the jobs that we are in anyways may not exist in the next couple of years, or maybe sooner, who knows. The kind of roles that we have at this point are undergoing change as we speak. So, if a leader was to have a mentality of holding on and, trying to go deeper and deeper into the current terrain versus reskilling and getting incremental skills under his or her belt, I would always advise him or her to go for the latter. Again, not necessarily going back to school, but building the right experiences or building the right skills through lessons of experience and skills. These skills could be built in a formal setup in a classroom, but they could also be built on the job. So I would advise leaders to reskill if I were to make a hard choice between the two.
Good advice. You also mentioned about, that we're in a crisis. We need to be prepared to deal with the crisis and possibly with the next crisis, which may not be too far away. But do people really think about the next crisis when they're dealing with the current one, you think?
Yeah, and human memory is short. So, and first of all, I hope people hang on to the masks and the hand sanitizers for much longer. I'm based in India, and I see a lot of people already not wearing masks and times like these. US, Singapore is much more stringent about this and so on. But human memory is short. And certainly very few people are thinking about the next crisis. However, I would expect the boards and the C-suite to start thinking about the next crisis already. In some parts of South Asia, for instance, already we see bird flu spreading, and this is the next crisis that is impacting food industry, especially meat industry, poultry industry, and so on. So already, the first crisis is not over for them, and the next crisis has already hit them, the restaurants and so on. So, while people may not think about it on a daily basis, I would expect the boards, I would expect the CEOs to revisit it at least once in a while and think about where we are going as an organization. What are the next crises that are likely to happen? These crises are hard to predict. So I would say the question to ask is, are we building incremental resilience as a business group, as a team, at an individual level? And if we are becoming more resilient, that hopefully we will be in a better spot in the next crisis whenever that happens.
Right. Okay. Well, we have one more question from the Q&A section. That's from Shirley. So she said, interesting concept regarding the triage. Who should be in such a team? In an SME, it's usually the few key decision makers at the top. So in a way, is there a de facto triage team in place already? It would be interesting if such a team is not made up of just the few top executives.
Yeah, Shirley, thanks for the question. Certainly true for the SME industry, where there are a few senior leaders or maybe the founder family and so on, who control the organization, and they are doing the triaging. But I think it is very myopic if they are just by limiting the triaging team to the senior leaders, because you need people on the ground to do that. I would say that the who sits on the triaging team is based on what is important to the organization. If cash flow is important to the organization, then irrespective of the level of the executive, you need somebody who has a handle on daily cash flows, let's say in another region, let's say in another country, to be on this triaging team. If let's say if you're a projects company and project delivery is at stake and that is the priority for you, then you need people on the project sites to be on this triage team. They may not be senior executives, they may be just project engineers, but you want them on the triaging team because they are the guys who are more close to how the crisis is playing out in what matters to the organization. So it depends on what are the success, what are the definers of success for the organization. But I would say it's being very myopic if only the CEO and the founding family or the controlling family is sitting on the triaging team. Then the entire purpose of the triaging team, I would say, is not being fulfilled.
Thank you, Sunil. Doesn't look like we have any other questions from the participants. So we've come to the end of today's webinar. Sunil, thank you very much once again for contributing your content and your insights and expertise. And also on behalf of the Chamber, my thanks to all the participants for spending the afternoon with us. If you've got any thoughts, feedback, ideas on how we can do things better, differently, do reach out to us at heretohelp@sicc.com.sg. Do visit our website for updates on subsequent webinars that will be taking place. Thank you, take care, and goodbye.
Thank you, Sharon. And it's been a privilege to be part of this community this afternoon. Hopefully, you learned a few things. I learned a lot through your questions.
Very much so.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sunil. Bye again.